So our speaker today, as I mentioned earlier, is my dad, Robert Williscroft. Now, Robert is still unusual in this crowd. He's not an Academy graduate. Well, actually, he's unusual in any crowd, but fair enough. He's not an Academy graduate. He actually enlisted in the Navy in 1961 as a sonar tech. He was Jonesy, if you've seen The Hunt for Red October. It went to the University of Washington under the now defunct Navy Enlisted Scientific Education Program, and then returned to Boomers as a weapons officer. Admiral Rickover came in and nuked the career path for those guys. So my dad went to dive school, and then things got interesting. So that's the point where I gotta stop and let this master storyteller tell his story. But there's a novel, actually there are I think 14 of them, but there's one that's getting released, and he's not going to forget to mention it. And with that, Robert, let me just cede the floor to you and let you tell your story as only you can do.
Well, thank you very much. Let's make sure that everybody can hear me. Okay?
I can hear you just fine, and we're ready for you to share your screen whenever you need to do it.
I'm not ready for that yet. I first wanted to talk just briefly about what you see in the background behind me. It's a bit unusual, but what that is a Bell Ranger helicopter that flew off of the NOAA ship Surveyor up in the Arctic, and this is in the Bering Sea. If you squint, you can probably see the NOAA ship Surveyor just beside my head over the nose of the Bell Ranger. I thought that would be an interesting backdrop for what we're about to do here. So having said that, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Jason told you, because despite his having grown up in my household, he still got a couple things wrong. We'll set that straight, and then go on into the stuff that Jason said was particularly interesting. So I am now going to share my screen. Is it shared?
I don't see it yet.
Okay, I know what I may have done. I have to hit the button shared. There we go.
There you go. Got it.
Okay, and then I just want to make this guy go away here. Okay, so this is a tale of how a young submarine sonar tech in the early 1960s found himself ultimately at the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk, and then up in the Arctic ice pack, and then at the geographic South Pole, and managed somehow to write 17 books in the process. So like Jason told you, I started off as an enlisted sonar tech, and back then we were not sonar techs, we called ourselves sonar men. And I was on the USS, so enlisted sonar tech, and I was on the USS John Marshall, SSBN 611 Blue. As Jason told you, I was selected for NESEP, that's the Navy Enlisted Scientific Education Program. I studied marine and atmospheric physics at University of Washington, and I returned to subs as the Navy's first Poseidon weapons officer on the USS von Steuben, SSBN 632 Blue. Now, the needs of the Navy forced me into the missile career path, and so I didn't attend nuclear power school, and so wasn't eligible for command of a nuke. I did, however, complete 9 deterrent patrols. In order to continue advancing on the path I wanted, I needed out of subs. But the only way out of subs at that time was to volunteer for Vietnam. And I did so and went to Defense Language Institute to learn Vietnamese for an in-country intelligence brief, VILIT. And the war was over by the time I graduated, and so the Navy parked me at a recruiting station in El Paso while they tried to figure out what to do with me. My CO was an old ASR skipper, a submarine rescue ship skipper. He recommended me for the Man in the Sea program, and that was my dream assignment, something I had always wanted. I went to dive school all the way through saturation diving for more than a year, and then I was assigned to Submarine Development Group 1. Initially, I served on the USS Ortolan, ASR 22, and then on the USS Pigeon. ASR 21, where I punched my surface tickets, and most of you guys know what I'm talking about there. Now, these 385-foot catamarans were motherships for the Mystic and the Avalon, the Navy's two deep submergence rescue vehicles, the DSRVs. Then I was assigned as officer in charge of the Test Operations Group, TOG. That's the nondescript name for the saturation divers that participated in Operation Ivy Bells. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So following my stint with TOG, I transferred my commission to the NOAA Corps, where I joined their extensive dive program in charge of NOAA diving throughout the Pacific. I served on the NOAA ship, Oceanographer, at the equator, where we studied the feasibility of mining manganese nodules. I served on the NOAA ship, Surveyor, in the Arctic, where I participated in the Outer Shelf Continental Environmental Assessment Program, OCSEP. We captured seals and other mammals for study. We spent a lot of time diving under the ice, and sometimes even around orcas, and found out that these guys are actually quite playful. They've never hurt a human out in the wild. They're a lot of fun to be around in the water, especially under the ice. Now, I threw in a photo here that was interesting. Just take a closer look at this. We were flying in a chopper on our way back to the ship, and we saw two cubs running for their ice cave, and we couldn't see Mama anywhere. So we landed, and one of the guys reached into the cave with heavy gloves and pulled the scratching, biting cub out. He dropped the cub in a footprint-free snow patch so that we were able to get this photo of the cub in the snow with no tracks leading to it. And that's pretty cool, I think. Anyway, I worked out of a habitat off St. Croix in the US Virgins, and then I found myself at the geographic South Pole. I was in charge of National Science Foundation atmospheric research down there for a full 13 months. While down there, I joined the 300 Club. Now, when the temperature stabilized below 100 degrees minus, we cranked the sauna up to plus 200, sat inside the sauna building up courage, and then we ran a quarter mile to the pole and back wearing only mucklucks, experiencing a 300-degree temperature drop, hence the 300 Club. And with that, I will leave my history with a panoramic view of the South Polar Plateau. And now we'll move on to what Jason really wanted me to talk about, which is a couple of books. But before I can talk about the book, for those of you who haven't been around as long as some of us, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background. When the Cold War was raging in the early 1960s, a real-life Navy officer was fishing with his son on Chesapeake Bay when he saw a sign on the shore that many of you have probably seen that read, "Underwater cable, do not anchor here." That sparked the germ of an idea that he pursued up the real Navy chain of command for the next several months. What if we locked divers out of a submarine on the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk at the location of the Soviet underwater communications cable, he asked. What if they were able to tap into the cable? What kind of intelligence could we reap from such a venture? Well, it turned out that the Navy actually had the capability to do this, but did not have the required infrastructure. This real project was so secret that virtually nobody knew about it. We built a working cover. You'll find this particularly interesting, I think. We built a working cover consisting of 2 deep submergence rescue vehicles, 2 catamaran motherships, each having 2 saturation diving chambers with flyaway system capable of carrying a DSRV to any worldwide destination, and several nuclear submarines that could transport a DSRV to a down submarine. Even though it was a front, the entire real-world system actually worked. Actually, however, it was a cover so that several specially modified nuclear subs could be put to sea with what looked like a DSRV mounted astern. The fake DSRV actually was a lockout saturation diving system that could put divers on the ocean bottom to a depth of 1,000 feet for the express purpose of tapping into Soviet underwater communications cables and as a side benefit to retrieve missile parts from spent Soviet missiles that splashed into the northern Sea of Okhotsk. This highly secret real-world project's fanciful name was Operation Ivy Bells. I entered the project as a lieutenant, the officer in charge of one of the diving teams that participated in Operation Ivy Bells. Drawing on my personal experiences actually, and the people with whom I worked every day as part of the real world Operation Ivy Bells, I wrote Operation Ivy Bells, the novel, as a first person narrative by J.R. Mac McDowell, the officer in charge of the diving team on the mission. Names have been changed, personalities blended, but the action and the events are, for the most part, real. So, on to Operation Ivy Bells, the novel. A super secret, off-the-books spy organization, a security clearance starting at top secret and going up from there, an attack by a giant squid during a 1,000-foot dive while breathing an exotic gas, a cat's whisker escape from death during a 3-day decompression, and that's just the first 2 chapters of Operation Ivy Bells before the action really gets underway. In a fast-paced personal narrative, J.R. Mac McDowell details the breathtaking series of events. Riding the nuclear submarine Halibut, Mac and his saturation diving team surreptitiously entered the Soviet-controlled Sea of Okhotsk on a proof-of-concept mission. They installed a tap on an underwater communications cable at 400 feet and narrowly escaped death when the storm snaps one of Halibut's anchor cables, which you can see here in this illustration. Here's where it is, where it's floating at neutral buoyancy with hanging off the cables, and then the storm just literally snapped one of the cables off. They retrieved missile parts from a Soviet missile test splash zone, getting caught in a sonar web set by a crafty skipper of an old Soviet diesel whiskey submarine, and two Cashin-class cruisers, the Odnavari and the Ognoboy. These are the 2 guys who were actually doing their level best to stop the Halibut from doing what it was doing. Mac's divers temporarily disabled the sub, the Whiskey, and Halibut escapes to Guam, dogged by the sub skipper who followed them out and was always out there somewhere. Having proved the concept, they return in a Halibut outfitted with skids so she can sit on the bottom and attach a 12,000-pound, 20-foot pod to the cable for future retrieval. During another storm, Halibut lifts a few feet off the bottom and sucks one of the divers under the skid. Fortunately, he isn't seriously injured because it's a soft bottom. And then in the missile splash zone, they lock in deadly underwater combat with a group of Soviet divers. With free world at stake, they capture one and kill the rest. And Halibut submariners and saturation divers finally escape the Sea of Okhotsk by tracking under a trawler and return home without ever publicly revealing their crucial contribution to winning the Cold War, receiving an unpublicized presidential unit citation and other personal awards. So that's the story of the novel, Operation Ivy Bells, which in essence tells the story of what actually happened out there back in the early 1970s. Operation Icebreaker is the next book in the Mac McDowell mission series, and it was released today. Today is the official release date. I checked on Amazon and damned if it wasn't actually there. It's a lot of fun when that happens. So USS Toothus was a modified Lafayette-class boomer that was assigned to lay 2 SOSUS arrays, one just west of Thule, off of Greenland, and the other one just west of Point Hope, north of the Bering Strait. And you can see their track here under the Arctic ice. Now, Electric Boat had removed the missile compartment and replaced it with a 10-foot diving operations compartment that you see here, and a 7-foot cable reel compartment, which you can see here. And together, they gave the boat a true special operations capability. Now, Mac McDowell was the officer in charge of the test operations group, the team of saturation divers who tapped into Soviet underwater communications cables on the floor of the Sea of Okhotsk. That was Operation Ivy Bells. And Mack and his team joined Toothus shortly before she set sail. They successfully laid the first array west of Thule, Greenland, and then crossed the Arctic. Let me jump back there. So they successfully lay one here, and then they cross the Arctic, and they lay another one right here. And here you see the Toothus surfacing. She's just on the other side of this ridge from Resolute. Resolute's just over this ridge right here. She surfaces to get a sat fix. You can see that polar bears came out and checked her out. Actually tried to get up on the sail and get at the guys up there. It was kind of interesting and pretty exciting. The whole time they were dogged by an Alpha submarine. I'm not sure whether you guys are aware of what an Alpha is or was, but it was the newest, fastest, high-tech sub that the Soviets had created, capable of diving down to something like 3,000 feet or so, 45 knots submerged. It was quite a beast. And she dogged the Toothus all the way across the Arctic. In the Prince of Wales Strait, that's right here, the Toothus was forced to use divers to work its way through a passage that was blocked by ice down to the seafloor. And while trying to follow them, the Alpha sustained serious damage transiting the same passage. And then as she nears their position off of Point Barrow, the Alpha's reactor scrams due to the damage and the crew is unable to start it up. Now, the Alpha's reactor was cooled with liquid lead bismuth, so when it cooled, the metal froze, rendering the reactor forever unusable. The small crew was forced to abandon the sub and escape pod that was unable to break through the solid ice cover. They were unaware that Toothus was nearby on the bottom, and Toothus contacted Subdev Group 1, who arranged the rescue of the Alpha crew. And here you can see how the escape pod fits into the sail of the submarine, and the crew. It's a small crew. They get in the pod and it just runs to the surface. Anyway, Toothus can't pass up this unique opportunity to gather intel on a new high-tech, highly automated Soviet sub, but they need special equipment to gain access to her interior. So they go to Kodiak, where they unload the Mystic, one of the Navy's 2 deep submergence rescue vehicles, and her crew of 4. The Mystic is also accompanied by 4 Defense Intelligence Agency Alpha submarine specialists and someone out of the past, Sergei Andreev. Sergei was a Ukrainian saturation diver Mack had captured on the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk, and he and Mack became close friends as time passed after that. And while they're in Kodiak, Matt meets and falls in love with Kate Perry, who's the widow of a Coast Guard officer who perished during a difficult at-sea rescue. Anyway, Toothus returns to the bottomed Alpha with the Mystic and the DIA Alpha specialists. And while the specialists are inside the Alpha collecting intel, a much larger, this is the Mystic, you can see the inside of it here, but a much larger Soviet submarine, Sierra 1, shows up. The sub's divers emerge to investigate the Alpha. Mack and his divers manage to overpower them and scram the Sierra reactor by flooding the cooling system from the outside with liquid paraffin, forcing it to the surface. Because Mack's team had killed or captured all their divers, the Sierra had no way of knowing what had happened, except that somehow they lost their dive team. So Mack comes up with the idea to salvage the Alpha, crew it, and take it to electric boat through the Arctic. The mission's approved by the Navy, and Toothus and Mack and his divers return to Kodiak to outfit, taking over the Alpha, and while there, Mack reunites with Kate, and that is the end of Operation Icebreaker, and brings us to a book that is currently being written, Operation Arctic Sting, which simply continues the story, and it sets up, it'll be out in February, and it commences with a bang as the Soviet sleeper cell in Kodiak attempts to sabotage the Toothus and nearly kills Mack and Kate. The book details the actual taking over of the Alpha, with Mack bringing it through the Arctic ice pack to the East Coast. Here's the track. So from approximately here, they take it through the ice pack all the way around to electric boat. they've got to stop roughly every 24 hours to recharge its battery bank of 112 zinc silver batteries because the reactor's not working. To do this under the Ice Academy, they use divers to run a cable from the Toothus to the Alpha. They're accompanied by a couple of US fast attacks, and they end up in a very serious confrontation right here at Bela Strait, where when it's all said and done, one of the Soviet subs is sunk. In any case, they finally get back to Groton, Connecticut. Mac is united with Kate, and that will be the end of that story when it's finally written. And with that, I bring you back to, if I can find it, to the real world somewhere. If I can get out of this. Here it is. No, hold on a second. What I need to show you one more thing here. Okay. There we go. These are the books. Back one. These are the books that are available at the website, robertwilliscroft.com. I'll put that in the notes. And today I'm offering, because Operation Icebreaker is coming out today, it's been launched, I'm offering a special for you guys, and I mean it just for you guys. If you want to get both of them softbound, you can have them both for $25, which is normally the cost of one of them. Or if you want them hardbound, you can get them for $35. I will autograph them, and we'll talk back and forth by email, and I'll personalize it for you, and it includes the shipping. So it's a pretty good deal, and you can contact me by email, and we can work it out. So there you are. Again, $25 for the set of softbound, or $35 for the set of hardbound, including shipping. And I push the stop share button, and that should take me back to the real world. There we go.
And it has. That's what a story. Guys, I remember I was at the Naval Academy. I think it was my youngster year, so maybe 1992. And Robert, you sent me a book that was not fiction, but was all the Ivy Bell stuff had been declassified, and I can't remember the title of the book. But you sent me a book written by a fellow who'd gone through the whole thing and told the story. And your inscription on the book was, "This is what I was actually doing." I mean, what a story.
The book was Blind Man's Bluff.
There you go. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, fascinating book, by the way. If anybody's interested in especially after having read these novels, I can't remember anymore. Which stuff actually happened, and which was, and frankly, I don't know which parts actually happened and which were only in the novel. Robert, a question for you about Ivy Bells. This is a real world question. So something that you and I have actually never spoken about, and I'm curious to hear you talk about it. In 1980, some joker named Ronald Pelton walked into a KGB office and compromised the Ivy Bells program. Can you give us a couple of minutes and tell us about that? And what was that like for you guys?
Well, this guy was a Navy chief, believe it or not. He had financial problems, and he got paid $30,000 for giving up Ivy Bells. What happened is that when the Parche, which followed the halibut, it followed the halibut and the sea wolf. When the Parche went in to pick up the data out of the pod that we had put there, the pod wasn't there. And it turned out that that Pelton had told the Soviets. They went out and managed to snag it and pull it to the surface. And if you go to the Moscow Maritime Museum, you will see that pod proudly displayed there today. All 12,000 pounds of it.
Wow, that's something.
That son of a bitch, he seriously put the lives of a whole bunch of heroic guys at risk. Sure he did. By the time he did it, I was out of the program, but it was still. It's the kind of guy. It's the kind of guy you'd very much like to just put a bullet between his eyes. Amen.
Here's another question for you before I open up the floor. So the alpha in the second novel, the downed alpha, it's highly reminiscent of the Kursk, right? Were you thinking about the Kursk when you wrote that? And could you talk a little, because as I understand it, we never actually got to use the DSRVs, in their advertised mission, but we would have if the Soviets had let us, or if the Russians had let us help with the Kursk. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We could have done it. We probably could have pulled. We could have pulled whoever was alive out of it. It was perfectly feasible. The system was designed to work, and it was designed in such a way that it could mate on virtually any nation's submarine. So it would have worked. And I was not thinking of the Kursk when I put this together. There in the Soviet annals, there are a couple of missing submarines that they don't talk much about. One of them's an Alpha.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that reactor design, you don't get to make many mistakes on that one for sure, right?
What they had to do finally, they had heating chargers on the docks where they pulled the Alphas in, and that kept the coolant liquid. But as the Russian infrastructure began to fall apart, it just they finally gave up and just ran them all the time. They never turned them down. They never turned them off.
Wow. Well, I know we got some bubbleheads on the call here, so let me step back and open the floor for questions. We got a few minutes. Anybody got questions for my dad?
Well, I'm not a bubblehead, but I have a.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm all in on books, so I'll take 2 hardbacks. And I've already bought the Audible version for a trip we're taking next month. But my question was going to be about Parche. I have a friend who was Cobb on Parche. And I was going to ask how the halibut and the Parche kind of fit together. You've talked about that a little, but were they contemporaries, or how were they set up together?
The halibut was the first. It was an old guided missile sub, the first sub built as a guided missile launcher. And so it was reaching the end of its service when it was converted for this use. And the fake DSRV, the saturation diving chamber, was put on the stern. The next boat was the old Seawolf, and it had a diving chamber inside the hull. Now, with the DSRV, fake DSRV on the outside of the hull with a halibut, she was limited to about 6 knots. That's all she could do. And the Parche also had the external chamber, but it was done in such a way that she probably could go 10, 11 knots, but that was it. So she followed on. The halibut was no longer working when the Parche was out there doing her thing.
I got a question real quick, Jason, if that's all right.
Sure, please.
So Robert, you can't go through those experiences without learning some lessons or having some good advice from your ventures. And you mentioned all your ventures, you mentioned facts, but what I'm really interested in is some of the lessons or some life-changing things along the way during those adventures in your career that you would take away and you could pass on to us.
I like that question because one circumstance that I did not mention at all in my narration, but I will tell briefly now, points out a really important lesson. When I was at the South Pole, I had a lab that was about 100 yards upwind from the main station. We had a geodesic dome with buildings inside the geodesic dome, but at ambient temperature, and we were down 110 or so below continuously during the winter. One of the problems at the South Pole is that everything is very dry. Fire is a real danger. We had a Quonset archway that was filled with 10,000 gallon bladders of special Arctic diesel fuel. It's called DFA, Diesel Fuel Arctic. And we practiced fire drills. I was the station fire chief, so I organized drills everywhere. And everything we could think of, we had fire drills, but the one place we didn't practice a fire drill was in the fuel arch, because we had taken the fuel, put it in a bucket and tried to light it on fire. It didn't seem possible to us that the fuel would burn in the conditions down at the South Pole. Well, as winter progressed, I got a guilty conscience. I talked to the station manager, the guy who was in charge of the facilities, and there were only 19 of us. That's all we were wintered over. And I said, look, let's have a drill for the fuel arch. And he said, sure, let's do it. And so we spent an entire day practicing what we would do if we really had a fire in the fuel arch. We took our Scott masks, our Scott air pack masks, and we put construction paper inside them so that it was darkened and we couldn't see, because diesel fuel would make black smoke. Well, 2 weeks later, I was in my lab when the fire alarm sounded, and the station manager came on and said, this isn't a drill, folks, this is for real. And it took me about 15 minutes to get to the station because the temperature was cold. I tried to go in through the fuel arch, and the door blasted open and knocked me on my butt with black smoke billowing out of it. So I finally got around through the main entrance of the station, and everybody was there waiting for me. And when we worked our way into the fuel arch, we found one of the bladders fully involved. And we managed to put it out with some heroic effort on the part of one of the guys who was injured in the process, but not life-threateningly. And when we sat down and gave ourselves a careful analysis afterwards, we realized that if we had not drilled, if we hadn't had that exercise and knew what to do, by the time we got our act together, we would have all been dead. One of the things we discovered was, for instance, we had a Purple K hose, a PPK hose that was on a reel that you could pull into the fire position. And when we tried to pull it, it shattered into a million pieces.
Wow.
So lessons learned, due diligence over and over again. Anytime you're in a hazardous situation, do your due diligence, never, ever neglect it.
That's a good one. Yeah. Can you, I remember this story. How'd that fire start, Robert?
The fuel bladders, the one that was in use, was covered with a heat blanket, and then it had a yard thick layer of fiberglass batting over the top of it. And somehow the fuel bladder had sprung a leak, and the fuel had wicked its way up into the batting and then shorted out the heat blanket and started the fire. And every time we would knock the flames down with the fire extinguishers, we couldn't use the hose, but the fire extinguishers, it would go down, and as soon as we stopped doing it, it would immediately ignite again. And the only place we could turn the power off was on the other side of the fire.
If I could, Jason, if what I took from that was, and whether you're in the business world or you're still in the military, you cannot discount an anomaly. You have to account for that. You have to anticipate it. No matter how small the chance, it's still a chance. So I appreciate that, Robert. And I think what I took from your story was don't discount a potential anomaly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah.